characterized your winemaking style as pragmatic. Can you elaborate on how this philosophy manifests in your day-to-day winemaking practices?
I've really grown to dislike dogma in life in general. And I think as a young winemaker coming out of school, I was somewhat dogmatic in what I did. I was kind of set in my ways. For instance, I said I was never going to do Pinot Noir. Well, now I do Pinot Noir. I was following what other people were doing because I thought that was what the best thing to do would be. Over time, I've learned that there's very few rules I need to follow when it comes to winemaking. That by letting go and letting the process take forth, my wines, I think, are more distinctive. It doesn't mean they're better, it doesn't mean they're worse. And that's my goal, of course, is to make the best wines that I can, but as importantly to that is to make very distinctive wines.
I know you were around Pinot Noir and Chardonnay at Fess Parker, but did you ever make them for your tercero label, or did you pretty much go into Rhone varietals exclusively with tercero?
So I started by working exclusively with Rhone. So my first white was a Grenache Blanc. Mm-hmm. Chris Curran had a great impact on me, as she did anyone who did Grenache Blanc, and I was lucky.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. I was lucky to work with her. We sold her a lot of grapes. She bought a lot of, I think Camp 4 was the first vineyard that she worked with for Grenache Blanc. So my first wines were Grenache Blanc, Syrah, Mourvedre, Grenache, and Petit Syrah. I then started working with Gewurztraminer, just because it's a fascinating variety.
Sure, yeah.
And I talked about distinct varieties. Gewurztraminer is about as distinct as you can get, and it is not confused with any other variety when I have a well-made one. So I focused on Rhones, but really the last 5 years I've started thinking about other types of varieties, and I started working with Pinot in 2020. Mm-hmm. And I tell people 3 reasons why. Number one, I got remarried. My wife loves Pinot, and said if I don't, there's going to be some issues. Number two, the opportunity arose in 2020. 2020 was an integral year with COVID, et cetera, to think about doing different things. And number three, something that's near and dear to my philosophies in life, we should not ever say never or always. Mm-hmm. And I said I was never going to do Pinot for dogmatic purposes. I drew a line in the sand and said, everyone is doing it, I'm not going to do it. And when I started making Pinot, so many people came up to me and said, Larry, you said you were never going to do Pinot. And I never want to be put in that position again.
That's a good reason for a conversation starter.
Well, it is. And what I find fascinating to me is Pinot, and I know you've worked with Pinot, Pinot to me is very similar to Grenache in that it's a very transparent variety and really shows its sense of place, its sense of vintage, and its sense of winemaker intent. And as a winemaker who really tries to take a back seat to the process, I think I make pretty distinctive Pinots from that perspective.
And they're both oxidative varietals. They have that in common as well.
They're oxidative varietals, but they're also, I think one of the differences between the two is Pinot oftentimes, I think Pinot's a little bit more versatile in that you can make a 12% Pinot and it can be fascinating.
Sure.
You can make a 16% Pinot and it can be fascinating. I think with Grenache, it's very challenging to go too low and still have it have the essence of the variety itself.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And then the other thing is Pinot tends to have a higher acid level, lower pH, because it's grown commonly in cool climates. And that does allow it, even though it's oxidative, it can hold on a little bit longer than a Grenache, I think, in my perspective.
And historically as well.
Yeah.
What's your feeling about stem inclusion?
Well, that's part of the evolution.
In red wines, I should say.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's become part of the evolution of my winemaking process. When I started making wine, Blair Fox, the head winemaker at Fess Parker, again, who had a great impact on me, disliked stems, hated them. Well, me and Dave Potter, who now owns Municipal Winemakers in Potec, were both working with Blair in 2006 when I started there, or 2005 when I started there. And we both wanted to experiment with stems. So we would kind of like, oh, let's do just one box and throw 20% in. And I loved the effect it had. So in 2007, I made a couple of wines that had some stem inclusion, not really understanding how to work with stems. Mm-hmm. And I still have one Grenache. I have not opened up a bottle in a while, but those stems were out of balance. In 2009, I did a couple of 100% stem wines. One was a Syrah from Thompson Vineyard, and one was a Grenache from the Larner Vineyard. And early on, the wines were kind of strange. I remember I had winemaker friends try the Syrah about 18 months in, and it smelled like liquid smoke and canned green beans.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, what are you going to do with this? It's just going to let it ride. And 6 months later, it smelled like olive tapenade and violets, and I poured it at hospice, and it was a knockoff, not a knockoff, but Northern Rhone, it was not that far away from what Northern Rhone Syrahs were like. And so I realized the cause and effect of stems is a much longer term effect. But starting in 2014, all of my red wines are now 100% stems.
Oh, okay.
And they have been 100% stems since 2014. Stems are challenging. People always ask me, do you need bright green stems? Or do you avoid bright green stems? And my answer is no.
It's not about color. It's more about the flavor of the stems.
It's about the flavor of the stems, but it's
Right.
also about stem management. So
Sure.
I keep my ferments not too high in temperature. If you're doing 16, 17% alcohol wines with 100% stems, you're going to
Yeah.
get a lot more pulled out of it.
Right.
So it's lower alcohol and it's lower fermentation temperatures are going to help modulate what you pull out of those stems. But I like to say stems make a wine imperfect in the same way that classic vinyl makes music imperfect. To me, it's beautiful to hear scratches.
Right.
It adds a liveliness to the wine. I think people are scared of stems because they feel it's going to take away from the purity of the fruit. I'm not trying to make purely fruity wines. I'm not a fan of wines that all they have to say is fruit. I want there to be other things involved. I use all older oak barrels. I've never used anything younger than a 4-year-old French oak barrel for reds.
You don't buy new ones and then season them down.
I buy used barrels. I've never, so at Fess Parker, we would buy hundreds of new oak barrels. I worked with hundreds of new oak barrels. I understand the sexiness of putting your nose into a glass from a wine that comes from 100% new oak, Francois Frere, heavy toast. I mean, it is in your face. But I also learned that oak can cover up things as well. And I'm very much a transparent winemaker. So I've learned with older oak, the stems help modify the tannin that I would get with new oak, but there's just a pureness to working with older oak that I really enjoy. It really tends to show off, again, the process and the fruit and the site and the vintage, to me more so.
And with your reds, do you use open top fermenters exclusively?
Yes.
I know you're known for foot stomping.
One of the questions I get asked all the time, are my feet clean when I foot stomp? So the answer is, number one, yes. Number two, with as much dirt and other bugs and stuff that come in, I don't think you should be worrying about my feet.
All my reds are foot stomped on day one, so I'm not trying to do piégeage all the way through the process. All I want to do is I want to break enough clusters to be able to allow me to do punch downs. Now, I don't do a 5-ton. If I did a 5-ton open top, 100% stems, I would probably not have any quads left.
You'd need some help with those.
I would need some electronic device, which is what they use, right? Some pneumatic device. With 1.5-ton boxes, it's very feasible to foot stomp aggressively on day one, and I'll be in every half-ton bin for about 10 minutes. There's never a time when it's done. You just get to a point where, like, all right, I think I've done enough. I'm probably crushing a third of the clusters, because then it gets dumped into a fermenter. I'm like, I thought I did better than that. And then it depends on the variety. As you and I both know, every Rhone variety, the turgidity of the berries are all different.
Sure.
So when I'm working with Mourvedre, they give it up.
Yeah.
When I'm working with Grenache, they stay solid.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
every variety is going to be different.
This bin has been stomped now for a good couple of minutes. You can still see there's some whole berries, there's plenty of whole berries, but there's also a lot of juice. This bin has not been stomped at all. And so what you'll find is when I stomp, I go down a bit, foot gets covered, but I'm not going anywhere near the bottom.
Georgia, what are you doing? What are you doing? Are you stomping the grapes?
What is it like being a father for the second time?
So for those who don't know, I have 3 grown children, 26, 25, and 23-year-olds, who are very, very wonderful young adults. I met somebody who had never had kids before. We dated for a long time, got married, and I now have a 3-year-old, which is a blast. People ask me what it's like, and I'll put it into a couple of terms. I was speaking to an attorney. He asked me what it's like. I said, well, imagine trying a case 20 years ago and trying that same case now. It's incomparable. You're not the same person. So I can't parent the same way now that I did 20 years ago. I just can't at all. But what I also tell people, probably my favorite aspect of being a father the second time round is I truly am living not my life through my 3-year-old's eyes, but I'm seeing what she is experiencing and appreciating every single moment of it. I'm appreciating the fact that she has no filters.
Walking in the forest, walking in the forest. And 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, 4.
I'm appreciating the fact she has no stereotypes. She doesn't live in generalizations. She doesn't look ahead to the future. She's not living in the past. She's living right here and now. And so when I meet people now, I try to do the exact same thing. No filters, no stereotypes, and it's so enjoyable. My conversations that I have with people now compared to even 3 years ago, much more fun, much more interactive. It's made me a better person having this child. And I'm excited to see where she goes, and I'm excited to see where my wife and I go as well as part of this journey.
An oxidative varietal is a variety that oxidizes easily. Some kind of classic examples of that are Pinot Noir and Grenache. If they're exposed to too much air, they can kind of prematurely age. And the opposite of an oxidative varietal is a reductive varietal. Some classic examples of that are Syrah and Mourvèdre, which actually appreciate, and I guess you could throw Cabernet Sauvignon in that as well. They actually appreciate getting some aeration during the aging period and during processing of the wines. Stem inclusion is when, in the fermentation process with red wines, you leave some whole clusters. In other words, you don't destem them. And the inclusion of stems in the fermentation gives the wine kind of an extra energy and an extra layer of flavor and a little bit of extra tannin as well. Something with stems is you want the stems to be mature. In other words, you want them to be ripe, like the grapes are ripe. If the stems are too green, they can add a green component to the wine, which is not necessarily attractive. But stem inclusion is commonplace with a lot of Pinot Noir and a lot of Syrah. Those two grape varieties in particular. Other varieties as well. And it's also a very traditional method. In the old days, stems were almost always used in the fermentation of red wines. Yeah, they didn't have Destemmers as we know them now. Eventually in fact, I used to have one of these. There was this huge kind of wicker like blanket that they back in like the 19th century, they would put the grapes on this wicker blanket and kind of wrap it up and then put that over something that would catch the juice and then step on top of the wicker blanket. The juice would drip down through it into whatever the vessel was that they were putting it into, and the only thing left behind would have been the stems and the skins. Now, or the stems, because the skins would also be allowed to fall through the wicker blanket. It depends on the wine. For years, I made a Syrah from the Biennacito X block, which unfortunately is no longer, but that was the oldest Syrah block here at Biennacito, and it was torn out after the 2024 harvest. But that wine was 100% whole clusters, 100% stem inclusion during the fermentation process. And I still make a Syrah from Biennacito from the newer Z block. When I say newer, it was planted in 1992, so that's a pretty mature vine now as well. And with that, I use anywhere between 1/3 and 50% stems or whole clusters in the fermentation.